Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC Vegas 74, Kai Kara France versus Amir Albazi. We saw some great performances. We saw some crazy finishes. We saw some questionable judging, but we also saw some terrible losses. And we are going to discuss who deserves to be cut from the UFC after their performance at UFC Vegas 74. And honestly, I could have made this list a mile long, but I wanted to narrow it down a bit. So I have two honorable mentions. And what I mean by that is, I don't believe necessarily they deserve to be cut solely after their performance at UFC Vegas 74, but they are on the chopping block in their next fight. And honestly, it wouldn't shock me if the UFC cut them right now. So that's why I wanted to kind of halfway include them in the list. Starting off with the first honorable mention, we have Luan Lacerta. He looked horrible against Damon Blackshear. I mean, he looked so good in his UFC debut against Cody Stamann, even though he lost. I had high hopes for him in this fight against Damon Blackshear. I picked him to win. And honestly, all he did was just roll for leg locks and knee bars and just held on to him while he's getting brutally ground and pounded and just held on to the leg, and he's getting brutally punched and continually ground and pounded. And then eventually the referee just steps in. Such a low fight IQ moment. He's now 0-2 in the UFC. I had high hopes for him. The bantamweight division is so stacked. After a performance like that, and now he's 0-2. I think if he doesn't perform well in his next fight, I think he probably deserves to be cut from the organization. I hope the UFC gives him at least one more chance, because he did show a lot of promise in that Cody Stamann fight. But in the Damon Blackshear fight, he gassed out, was rolling for leg locks, basically just spamming. He looked like Ryan Hall out there against Ilia Topuria, and he paid for it. And I don't understand, like, when you're rolling for a leg lock and the guy has essentially a body triangle with no body in between, he's just locking his legs up, there's no way to get that out. And then you're just laying there eating undefended ground and pound shots. Just seeing that alone, honestly, I was like, maybe he needs to be cut from the organization, but I think he should get one more chance. Moving on to the other honorable mention, Bakr Nurmagomedov. And I know maybe some people are going to be like, how could you, how dare you, the last name Nurmagomedov. He looks so bad against Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. And I know he's only on a one-fight losing streak, but he looks so bad. And all he did was just hold on for dear life. Exactly with what a lot of Dagestani fighters say, or not Dagestani fighters, a lot of Dagestani fighter haters always say about Khabib and Islam that isn't true, is true about Bakr Nurmagomedov. He just grabs on, doesn't do anything, and just hangs on, tries to get control time and get a win. And it's just a bad look for him. It's a bad look for the Nurmagomedov name. And that's all he did in this fight. He had some moments in the first round. I thought he won the first round, landed a couple big shots. But after that, all he did was just clinch up and hold on for dear life and expected to win off of control time when he's eating knees in the clinch, getting beat up in the clinch. And the fact that it was even a split decision is, I mean, that would have been a horrible look if he would have got the win, just hanging on for dear life, not doing anything, unable to get the takedown, unwilling to strike. The gas tank was not there. I know he has the last name that you think, a lot of people see that last name, they're like, oh, he's got to be good. I just don't think he's UFC caliber. He's fighting an Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, who's been off for like 2.5 years, I think it was, something along those lines. And he had nothing to offer outside of a couple punches in the first round and a little bit of control time in the first round. The grappling isn't there. The cardio isn't there. The striking isn't there. The fight IQ to know you're losing and just continue to hang on against the fence, getting kneed, just isn't there. I think he's on the chopping block because he's only on a one-fight losing streak after this fight. But if he loses his next fight, I want him cut from the organization. Moving on to the actual list now. The first fighter on the list, and again, this is in no particular order. I have Maxim Grisham. I just think he looked terrible against Felipe Lins. And, all he really did was just kind of throw a couple strikes. And then even though he was being out-grappled and outworked in the clinch, he would clinch up and just dive in on the clinch. And he was losing in the clinch too, but he wasn't losing as badly on the feet. And he's just getting up there in age. I think he's 39 years old. He's almost 40 years old. He looks slow. Felipe Lins is no world beater. And Maxim Grisham, just his advantage was supposed to be on the feet. And he was getting outstruck on the feet. He looked terribly slow. And then he would clinch up. And the only thing he really had, the only moments of success he really had in this fight is he would throw an elbow over the top when they broke in the clinch. But outside of that, he was getting out-grappled, outworked in the clinch, outstruck. he looked like he was in slow motion compared to Felipe Lins. And Felipe Lins by no means is some elite of the elite in the light heavyweight division. And I just think, you look at Maxim Grisham. He's only on a one-fight losing streak, but his last win before this was against William Knight. We know what happened to him. Then the fight before that, he lost to Dustin Jacoby. And essentially, he's just trading wins and losses. And I just don't really think a guy of this caliber is going to make it to do anything, even in the light heavyweight division, which is one of the most, one of the least stacked divisions in all the UFC. I think it's time for the UFC to cut Maxim Grisham after that performance against Felipe Lins. Because who are you going to put him against next? And this opened up the card. This was the first fight on the card. Who are you going to put him against next that he's even ever going to be able to get a win? You can't build a name off of him by any means. So I think Felipe Lins probably ended the UFC career of Maxim Grisham at UFC Vegas 74. I want him cut from the organization. He's been around forever. 44 pro MMA fights, 32 wins, 10 losses. He hasn't been in the UFC for that long. He's only been in the UFC for 3 years. But I believe at his advanced age, the fact that he's losing to bottom of the barrel competition, he had nothing to really offer against Felipe Lins other than the elbow on the clinch exit. I think it's time for him to be cut from the organization. I think him being in the UFC is lowering the barrier of entry even more than it has been over the past couple years. Moving up on the list of who should be cut from the UFC after their performance, and I don't think this is going to shock a lot of people, but the UFC needs to cut Jinyu Frey. She looked horrible against Elise Reed, even though in a fight that was very competitive, all she did was just spam takedowns, and then once she got her down, she didn't do a whole lot. And she's getting up there in age. She's 38 years old. And what is she going to be able to do in the bantamweight division? I know the bantamweight division isn't stacked by any means, but she just looked horrible. And now she's on a 3-fight losing streak. And Elise Reed was landing on the feet. Even when she got taken down, she wasn't really absorbing a whole lot of damage. It was competitive, but outside of the first round, which I think Jinyu Frey probably took, the second and third round was just her the second round was really her grappling and not doing anything with it, getting some control time. And then once Elise Reed got back to the feet, she was landing on the feet and won the fight that way. And Elise Reed barely belongs in the UFC. So Jinyu Frey at 38 years old, it's time for her to be cut from the organization. She's on a 3-fight losing streak. Her last fight against Poliana Viana, where she got brutally finished in 47 seconds in the first round, I thought that might be it. And I know the UFC is short on talent in that division and in women's MMA in general, but the fact that she got another fight against Elise Reed and then loses that fight, and I think Elise Reed is bottom of the barrel. And then, honestly, the fight before that, she lost to Vanessa Demopoulos via split decision. I thought that should have been a clear loss to Vanessa Demopoulos. She's on a 3-fight losing streak against horrible competition. And in one of those fights, she got brutally finished. And she really had nothing to offer in this fight. She looks so low level. I don't want to watch her fight again. I don't care if it's on the early prelims. I don't care if it's on the prelims. It better not be on a main card ever. I mean, I know the UFC likes to force like Miesha Tate on the main card of pay-per-views and Holly Holm in the main event of fight night cards. But Jinyu Frey, at this point in time, go to Invicta, go somewhere else. I don't know who's really going to want to sign her, and I feel bad. I'm not wishing anybody out of a career here. This video is more about the barrier of entry into the UFC and the level of skills that should be required to be in the UFC. And I just don't think Jinyu Frey has the skill set to perform in the UFC. I think it's an embarrassment to the organization. When I watched her fight, and honestly, Elise Reed can go right out the door with her, to be quite honest. But she's at least a hair better. And you look at Jinyu Frey's record, she has 20 pro MMA fights. She's 11-9. She doesn't really have any good wins. She has a loss in June of 2020 against Kay Hansen, who's not even in the organization anymore because she's lower level. These are bottom of the barrel fighters here. And, she's losing and she's not looking good while she's doing it. It's not even a good fight to watch. And it's just so low skilled. I think Jinyu Frey needs to be cut from the UFC. Moving on to my last cut from UFC Vegas 74. And I think this might upset some people. But I think it's time, and I think we can make a scenario where it's a lot better than being flat out cut from the organization. And I'm wondering how many of these fighters you guys are going to agree with and how many of them you're going to disagree with. But I think it's time, and I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think it's time for the UFC to part ways with Andrei Arlovski. I know he's been in and out of the UFC since 2000. He made his UFC debut in 2000. He hasn't been in the UFC since 2000 because he left. He was in World Series of Fighting for a while. He was in other organizations for a while. But after seeing him getting brutally KO'd by Dontel Mays, second round KO, ate a massive right hand, went down with ease, got finished brutally. And this is his second straight brutal KO loss, or not KO loss, but brutal finish loss, because in his last fight he got hurt badly, dropped, but then he ended up getting rear naked choked by Rogerio de Lima. I think it's time. I mean, you look at his career, he has 58 pro MMA fights. That is crazy. And of his 22 losses, 12 by knockout. His last 2 losses has been by finish. He got hurt badly in both fights as well, took a lot of damage. He's 44 years old. There's no path to the top by any means. He's not helping building anyone's name at this point. Nobody even knows who Andrei Arlovski is barely at this point. Outside of hardcores, there's not anyone that's like, oh, can you believe Andrei Arlovski is still fighting outside of a few hardcores? And I just think it's best for his brain. And even if you go back to his most recent win against Jake Collier, that was a split decision that he may have very well lost. You go back to the Jarrett Vandera fight, split decision. I mean, rule of thumb, if you're having split decision wins over Jake Collier and Jarrett Vandera, you probably belong to be cut from the UFC anyway. And then now he gets a slight step up, just a very small step up against Marcos Rogerio de Lima, gets hurt badly, finished in the first round. And then against Dontel Mays, who, honestly, I thought about putting him on this list because he's not a very good fighter either. To get finished that badly by Dontel Mays, he won the first round, I understand that. But at what point are we just watching Andrei Arlovski take brain damage and not actually witnessing anything of any substance at all? I know some people just, give me a street fight, give me a wild, crazy fight. And that, for me, that's not what I'm watching. I want to watch the best versus the best. I understand that sometimes the UFC is going to build certain fighters in the organization and they're going to be lower level. But Andrei Arlovski's just hanging around and hanging around and hanging around. I mean, his second stint in the UFC, when did his second stint even begin? His second stint began in 2014. So he's had another 10 years in the UFC since he left and then returned. And at one point, I feel so bad for Andrei Arlovski because you go back to his win over Frank Mir back in 2015. He deserved a title shot at this point in time. To have that storyline would have been incredible. But instead, they're like, oh, let's book him up with Stipe Miocic. He gets brutally finished. Then in his next fight, he gets booked with Alistair Overeem. Gets brutally finished. Then he gets booked against Josh Barnett. Gets finished. Then he gets booked against Francis Ngannou. Gets finished. I mean, at one point in his second run, he had a 5-fight losing streak. Because after Francis Ngannou, he lost to Marcin Tybura. It's just, I mean, it's sad for me to see a legend like this just stick around for way too long. And I just feel like if the UFC keeps booking him, all we're going to see is him getting finished time and time again. And at what point do we say enough is enough? I hope he has something set up outside of the organization to make some money, but I don't want to watch Andrei Arlovski get KO'd anymore. And if he's losing to Dontel Mays, who are you going to find that Andrei Arlovski can beat? Honestly, because the chin is gone. I think the chin is completely gone. I thought the chin might have been gone a long time ago, but somehow, he was only getting hurt in fights and then surviving and being able to come back and win. But at this point, at an advanced age, he's getting towards 50s. He's in his mid 40s. So I think it's time to cut Andrei Arlovski from the organization. But I do hope that because he's a legend of the sport, could the UFC just talk to him, and maybe his family and his manager need to talk to him and convince him just to hang it up. And if that's the case, and let's say he says, give me one more fight, the UFC gives him a fight, hopefully a manageable fight against some terrible fighter at heavyweight, because heavyweight, keep in mind, it's not the greatest skill set by any means. It's not the deepest division by any means. Give him one more fight, give him a winnable fight. Win or lose, he retires in the cage after that fight. I wouldn't mind that, just to kind of have a little bit of a fairy tale ending, but even if he loses, at least he gets that opportunity to retire in front of the fans. I mean, the guy has been fighting for so long. His debut in MMA, not his UFC debut, was in 1999. That is craziness. So I think he does deserve to be able to retire in the octagon in front of fans. But at this point, it's just, I mean, I'm starting to think, does Dana White have a fetish with watching Andrei Arlovski get CTE in the cage? Because that's what I'm starting to think. And I know it's only a 2-fight losing streak, but he hasn't looked good for a long time. I don't remember the last time Andrei Arlovski looked good. I'm being honest. Like Like, I'm going back here. I'm looking at his resume. When's the last time he looked good? Probably against Frank Mir. Probably against Travis Brown, which was one of the craziest fights. If you have not seen that fight, go back and watch Andrei Arlovski versus Travis Brown at UFC 187 back in 2015. Incredible fight. That's probably the last time he looked good, and he got hurt badly in that fight multiple times. So this has been a road for the last 5 to 8 years of Andrei Arlovski probably needing to retire, and I think finally is the time that maybe give him one more fight. If not, and he doesn't want to retire, cut him from the organization. Hopefully he can fight lesser competition in other organizations and potentially get a win because he's still athletic. He's still athletic. Just the chin is not there anymore. Let me know what you guys think about all these cuts. Is there anybody I missed? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for watching.